Hellraiser is a 1987 movie based on the novella by Clive Barker called The Hellbound Heart, published the year prior. As much as I love a good compare-contrast of movie versus book, I will only be focusing on the book here, maybe including some clips of the movie for effect, but outside of that I won't be discussing the movie much. I feel the only real difference that is kind of relevant if you have watched the movie and not read the book is Kirsty. In the movie, Kirsty Cotton is the daughter of Rory, niece to Frank. In the book, she's not related to the Cottons at all. She's a friend of Rory that happens to have a thing for him, which is super weird given how it was adapted into the movie, but I wanted to get that out of the way to try and get y'all ready for me to talk about Kirsty's crush on Rory. In my opinion, it does make more sense for her to be his daughter, but that's just going to be the last I speak on it. Let's proceed. The book starts off observing Frank Cotton, a man whose hunger for more and more has driven him to finding the lament configuration, a small cube that is said to bring otherworldly pleasures to those who have solved it. He was warned that once solved, the creatures known as Cenobites would appear. He prepared things to say, as well as a little altar of things to appease them. What he doesn't prepare for is how they look when they actually show up. The term corrupted flesh is used to describe them, and I wouldn't disagree with that statement. Their skin was ripped apart and stitched back together, and with what little clothes they did wear, it was also stitched through their skin. So yeah, corrupted flesh is definitely the best way to describe it. Given how they look, any carefully planned questions he may have had died in his throat. His senses are overloaded, every nerve ending in his body just comes alive, and he feels everything, like even the feeling in his eyeballs is overloading him. It's agony, not pleasure. There was no pleasure in the air, or at least not as humankind understood it. When it eventually stopped, he was met with another Cenobite, sort of like their leader. She had a gritted face, feminine in appearance, with a scarred pubis sitting on a pile of severed heads. I fear that is exactly my type. From that first chapter following Frank, we then shift to Rory and his wife Julie moving into his grandmother's house. This house was willed to both him and Frank, but since Frank is about consistent as Midwest weather, Rory sees no issue with moving in. Julie's a f***ing problem. I cannot stand this bitch. I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but you will hate her too by the end of this, trust. Julie went about the house looking for a room suitable enough to be the master bedroom. While doing so, she found what will be called the damp room. It's a room that she doesn't like. The air is stagnant and the windows are nailed shut. Rory thinks it's perfect, but Julie very quickly shuts that down. Rory relents and they pick another room and continue working on the house, even having neighbors over, including Kirsty, who is a friend of Rory but secretly likes him. The neighbors did mention an odd fellow who stayed in the house for a few weeks last summer, and that was Frank. He hasn't been seen since because, well, Cenobites got his ass. This leads Julie down the path of thinking about Frank. She does also find a photo book of the brothers that document their lives, and Julie thinks about Frank and how she tried to deny her feelings for him until she couldn't, and she consummated her feelings for him, if you will. And for some reason after this, she decides to go back to the damp room while Rory's working in the kitchen. He heard something that caused her to go check in on Julie, and in the process, he mishandled a chisel that was in his hands, and it caused him to cut himself. Rory cannot handle the sight of his own blood, and he's on the verge of passing out. They end up going to the ER to get him stitched up. Later, they're discussing how the blood in the damp room was cleaned up, though neither of them claim to have done it. Rory went on to say, "You're such a perfect Hausfrau." Oh god. He said, "You don't even know when you're doing." Just because Rory isn't as bad as Frank doesn't mean he's a walking green flag. Julie and Rory host a housewarming party, again, including Kirsty. After a while, Julie retires to bed, hoping this will be a sign for Rory to wrap up the party. He doesn't, and the party lingers on as Julie returns to the damp room. I don't know why she keeps doing that. This time she heard something, and she decides that this is the perfect time to caress the plaster of the wall. Okay. Weird. She starts to feel like she's swimming in the dark, and something pulls her out of it, and that something happens to be a pile of viscera that calls her name. It's Frank, and Frankie boy wants one thing: blood. So from this, she deduces that, oh, that's where the blood went. Like, she's discussing afternoon tea? She does have some hesitance written into her thoughts, but overall she's taking all of this in stride, which I feel speaks volumes about her as a character. She wants what she wants, and she wants another chance at Frank. Despite how disgusting it is, she will do what she has to do to have him. On the other side, we have Frank, who felt helpless, trapped within the walls of his grandmother's home until Julie came along. He remembers untaming her. He thought he enjoyed the experience, but he didn't fully want to take Julie from Rory. His reason for that is because he truly could not be bothered. He would have been bored of her in a couple of weeks. Frank is incapable of forming any genuine bonds with anything or anyone. To quote, he had encountered nothing in his life, no person, nor state of mind or body he wanted to sufficiently to suffer even passing discomfort for. This exact mentality is why he's in the situation he's in the first place. This cocky son of a bitch. He even admits that in his meeting with the Order of the Gash, the Cenobites, arrogant to believe that his idea of pleasure would supersede theirs. Though through his fate he had heard whispers of a way to escape. He would need to be summoned, and if he is able to make a clean break, the Cenobites shouldn't be able to follow him. So when Julie accidentally summoned him in the damp room, he felt hope. Though he was also afraid she would be scared off. As we know, this psychopathic beauty has no issue with anything that is happening. Her and Frank are truly a match made in hell. I swear, if he could grow attached to anyone, it would have been her, because ain't no way anyone else would be this level-headed. May this type of love never find me. Julie devises a plan to bring Frank back. The honeypot, as Archer would call it. She sits at the bar waiting for men to come and talk to her, and she lured one of them into the damp room where a bit of a scuffle ensues, but she does end up killing him. We can't really blame her. I mean, it was her first time and she was very nervous. Not everyone is naturally gifted like Jane the Murderess. If you don't know who Jane the Murderess is, check out my last video. Shameless plug. With all this bullshit Julie is up to, it causes changes in her behavior around Rory. She's looking awful, worn down, tired. Though every time Rory tries to ask her about what's going on, she says she's fine. So his solution is to call Kirsty to ask Julie what's wrong. If he had even a semblance of self-awareness, he would be very aware of the fact that those two do not vibe together. But Kirsty is so smitten with Rory that she decides to just do it because she doesn't want to lose what little connection to him that she has. This will present major issues for our bloody Bonnie and Clyde, as after killing yet another man, Kirsty arrives at the home to have a word with Julie. She's very cold, even more so than normal towards Kirsty. She's also very intent on not letting her into the home. So this brings Kirsty to the conclusion that Julie's having an affair. Not entirely wrong. She doesn't know how to tell Rory, as Julie could totally worm her way out of any allegations unless she's caught red-handed. As she is leaving, she does take one last look at the house, specifically the window of the damp room where Frank is discreetly looking back. Now this is where things start to take another turn. Frank, the little predator he is, sets his sights on Kirsty, and the reason for that is that she lacks glamour. In Frank's little world, that means women like Kirsty could be flattered or bullied into acts that the beauties would never countenance, and be grateful for the attention. If you hadn't figured it out by now, Frank is absolutely just using Julie to become human again. He wants Kirsty, but he won't let Julie know that. Who else is gonna bring him back from the dead? Meanwhile, Kirsty tries to figure out how to break the news to Rory. If she was wrong, she could lose Rory forever, so her solution is to try to get more concrete evidence by watching and waiting the house. Rory went to a work party, and by the time he got home, all the murder stuff was done for the day, and he begs Julie to talk to him, and she doesn't. He hears a sound, and Julie tries to play it off as the storm that's currently brewing outside. Julie better think fast because Rory is approaching Frank. She plays like she's afraid of the storm and uses that to lure him away, and they have sex and he forgets all about the damp room. Julie went to visit Frank. It was like, what the dude, you almost got caught. Frank can't be bothered. He just wants another body, a radio, food, and bandages, because he's essentially a walking open wound at this point in his metamorphosis. Given his circumstances, this felt hella entitled, but I suppose we should expect nothing less from the motherfucker who sought demons for funsies. As Julie had promised, she did bring another man home. This time, private investigator Kirsty was scoping out the home. She saw Julie and the dude enter the home. Now, this dude actually changed his mind once he was inside en route to the damp room. The problem is Frank sealed this guy's fate. It was honestly sealed the moment he stepped inside the house. Frank himself actually steps out and kills him. completely wrenching the dude's jaw off. It's insane. Kirsty heard the screams and shuffle from inside. She snuck into the house from the back because trying to go through the front went so well last time. Hiding in a room, she saw Frank kill the guy, and she tries to get the hell out of there and save her own ass, but Frank sees her catching up to her awfully fast for someone with no skin. When he catches up to her, he announces that he's Frank, a small thing that ends up being the downfall of him. Kirsty looks for a weapon, ending up reaching for the configuration. Frank is desperate to get his hands back on the box. I have no idea where the hell it came from. I would assume it was in the damn room because that's where Frank had used it. Its location's honestly never discussed again until this very moment. Kirsty uses it as a bargaining chip. Except instead of running away, this dumb bitch is like, say please. Girl, what? Be so fucking for real. This is neither the time nor the place. I mean, he does it. This whole exchange feels weird. Should have just bashed his fucking head in with it. She opts to toss it out the window and then runs. And of course, on her way out, she finds the thing and takes it with her. From here, we jump to Kirsty being in the hospital. The whole hospital bit feels a little jumbled to me, but I will do my best to explain. Exactly how she got here, we don't know. All we do know is that she was found with the configuration and that it was covered in blood. Despite Kirsty being unconscious for a bit and not being able to explain what happened to the cops, they took the box and washed the blood off of it. That feels like extreme forensic neglect. They don't even keep it as evidence or whatever, they just give it back to her. Like, they just accepted that this unconscious woman had this random bloody box and they just cleaned it and gave it back to her. Case closed. Kirsty does tell the hospital staff that she doesn't remember anything when the box is given back to her. They hope that it will help jog her memory. She knows full well what the hell happened. There's just no way to convey it to others without being sent to the Grippy Sock hospital. Instead of dealing with that, she decides to play with the box until she ended up solving it. And as we know, nothing good ever comes from solving the damn thing. The Cenobites return for Kirsty. It doesn't matter that the puzzle was solved in ignorance. They were summoned and they aren't leaving empty-handed. These weird creatures are obviously yet another factor in this whole thing involving Frank. Kirsty knows that now, so she starts to bargain. She offers to bring them to Frank. So Pinhead says that if they are brought to him and makes him confess his real identity, they may not consider tearing her soul apart. What a lovely bunch. During this, Julie and Rory finally have a sit-down conversation about what's going on with her. She admits that she has a lot to tell him, but it would be easier to show him. Yeah. Remember how I said Frank is essentially a walking open wound? The last thing he needs to be whole again is skin. Well, it was nice knowing you, Rory. That was a lie. You're weird and you gave me weird vibes. Do I think you deserve to have your skin taken by Frank Gein over here? No, that sucks. Kirsty arrives at the house to see Rory, except Rory's no longer Rory. Rory looks awful. His skin is like bunched up around like his hairline. He and Julie admit that they killed Frank and not to worry about anything. No. Even if that's what actually happened, in no way, shape, or form am I not informing the police of a murder. To really sell this, they take her to go see Frank's body. This didn't work because Frank can't help himself from saying that he's Frank. But when he has Kirsty trapped in his claws and his freshly grafted skin falls off like silk, ugh. He admits his intentions to take over Rory's life. Further scuffle where Julie held Kirsty for Frank to kill, but at the last moment she got away, resulting in Frank stabbing Julie. Luring him back to the damp room, she upheld her end of the bargain. He said he was Frank and the Cenobites came for him. He tries to attack her one last time but is stopped by a plethora of hooks. This is where we get that iconic moment in the movie where Frank says Jesus wept before they tear his ass up.
Jesus wept.
And this is where things get even weirder. I know, it seems impossible. Kirsty goes to leave when she encounters Julie, in her wedding dress, with her own severed head in her hands. Finally she escapes and decides to keep the cube to monitor. To be very honest, I wasn't sure how well body horror in novels would work. Maybe it's because I have seen the movie first, but I felt like Barker did a really good job conveying how visceral the Cenobites looked. I'm not a fan of body horror in general, really, so normally I wouldn't think I'd go for it, but I am happy I did. Obviously, some of the language and stuff is pretty dated, and that's just kind of what happens with time. If you can get past that, I'd say give it a read. It isn't awfully long, about 180 pages, so if you do read it, I would love to hear your thoughts below. And that's really all I have for you today. Please remember to drink water and return your library books on time, or else.